All right. Welcome, everybody. Live episode. This is one of those weird situations where I don't want to be like, oh, I'm happy to be here. Happy to do. This is kind of a dark subject. And I want to address that right away. We're talking about dark topics, but I still think it's very educational and people can get a lot of value out of this. Folks, you've seen Gavin Stone on the channel before, I'm quite sure, especially recently. I also am bringing back Peter Hyatt, who's so kind to come back with his expertise. And today we also have Steve Johnson, who does not only statement analysis, but handwriting analysis. So it's a nice suite. So we've got body language, statement analysis, psychology from Gavin, statement analysis. What were you describing that, Steve, that Peter's doing? Linguistic?
This psycholinguistic profiling.
Psycholinguistic profiling, which I hadn't heard before, Peter. So you've been hiding your light under a bushel. I don't know what's going on there, but that's awesome, which does take statement analysis to a new level. Then statement analysis and handwriting analysis. So everybody is doing this, which is probably good because we're tackling a statement, we're tackling a note from someone who is no longer with us. So no matter what happens, it is going to be, a degree of speculation. So this is the Brian Laundrie notebook, last note, etc. Have to be careful with the wording because of YouTube, but he essentially ended himself, if we will, after killing Gabby Petito. I don't know any other way to put it. So we'll go ahead and start off. We have a note here on the side with Peter. And let me add this to the screen here really quickly. And we'll start going into this. Now, folks, I may be slow on super chats, things like this. I will try to catch up later on. I deeply do appreciate it. And actually, let me, out of politeness, put myself on the bottom. So if I'm going to cover a face, it'll be mine, because I just hate doing that. And Peter, what have you found with this note? And I know Gavin's going to have a ton of questions for you too, but let's start to just go through it.
Well, the psycholinguistic profiling is where we seek to identify anonymous authors, for example. So if someone has sent a threatening letter or a threatening email to another, even through text messages, what we look at is the words to reveal the person's background, to reveal the person's hopefully age, of course the gender, but also the words we choose will give us the dominant personality traits, especially in a context like this, which is known. And so as we look at this, we're going to look for certain things that may not seem quite as obvious to the eye, but upon consideration, they're worth, I think, asking questions about.
Okay, as an example, I just thought about it. I saw a video of Steve's recently, and Steve was saying, as an example, I was telling my wife that I needed to go to two places, but the freeway was going to be backed up, da-da-da. And I said, oh, so he's West Coast. And the tell was he said freeway. Here in Virginia, I've been corrected many times. You don't say freeway, you say interstate. Other cases like up where you are, Peter, what do you say for a grocery cart?
For a grocery cart?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Well, there are some places I know that say buggy. Like I had a boss from Connecticut, and he called it a buggy. And there's
Maine is pretty different. It's still wicked cold up here.
There you go. So is that kind of what you're doing? Is things like that, keywords, things that might be revealing in a location in addition to personality?
Well, I'll give you an example. We're working on this week an international case of a very high-ranking leader of a country who received text messages looking for an extortion, a tremendous extortion. And our task, which is very difficult, but our task is to see if we can identify Who is sending those text messages? Who is the extortioner? And we've had over the years some pretty good success with this. It's inexact, but we're generally able, the more someone will speak, the more someone will send messages, the lengthier a letter, the more we can know about them. And so that's the type of where we're looking at not only the background, what's the priority of the letter? Mm-hmm. And this will become important here.
Interesting. And I've actually had Jim Fitzgerald, or of the FBI, who is a forensic linguist himself, who helped break the Unabomber case. So there's definitely some parallels, I think, in that. So I guess that would be great for a first question. And was this written by Brian Laundrie exclusively, in your opinion?
I think so. I think that this is not something that would be very easy for another person to have a strong influence on. This is a unique personality. The setting is obviously most unique, and that tells us in the greater and even in the lesser context of where he was writing it, which was something that Steve would be able to tackle. This is likely, from at least from my perspective analysis, written by him, by someone who's very much narcissistic-like, and someone who was very intent on portrayal. It was very important to him.
Okay, and by portrayal, you mean projecting an image of himself upon us to what we're supposed to see?
Yes. You know, here we have it. It begins with addressing Gabby. Gabby's deceased by this point. Mm-hmm. And so we know that this is what we call the intended recipient, the recipient of the letter or of the note. The unintended recipient is going to be those that read it after he's gone, a much greater audience. That is often the most important target for an audience, for the writer, for the author. And here we have someone who is writing to someone that's deceased, but really has one eye on, I believe, his parents, Gabby's family, and the public at large.
Okay. And so what is he saying here? I know there's a lot of I. Mm-hmm.
I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could, and he could make that wish come true in that sense of suicide after having murdered her. But I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could be talking to you right now. I'd be going through every memory we've made, getting even more. Can you imagine even believing you could go through every memory? I wondered if that was rather like a Hollywood view. There was a movie, I think it was called 2 Seconds or something like that, with Edward G. Robinson, where he was going to the death penalty, and there's a lapse between, maybe 5 seconds, a lapse between, the doctors claimed, him losing consciousness and dying and his brain still working. And in that time, his entire life will pass before his eyes. And in different ways, it's been portrayed in Russian literature, it's been portrayed in Hollywood, in many different ways. And so I think this is a little bit of hyperbole on his part, because he's got a purpose in what he's doing. And so he's romanticizing a murder and then eventual suicide.
There is a cinematic quality, I think, that comes in later. And I'll bring up something I thought I saw. But yeah, I can totally see what you're saying. Gavin, do you have any? Is this lining up with what you've seen, and Steve?
Yeah, there was a couple of thoughts with this where I wasn't sure at first when I did the first read through whether it was actually written for his sake or whether it was written to kind of project an image, to kind of say, look, this is how much I love Gabby, knowing that other people were going to read this note at some point, saying like this is like how much I loved her, this is how much she meant to me, and whether that image was what he was trying to set before going deeper into the rest of his note.
Steve?
Yeah, I definitely think that this was written by Brian. I think the whole note was written by Brian. not only from the words themselves, but also the handwriting. Whoever wrote it is the same person, and from the language, I don't really sense an influence from somebody else. I don't see that influence from somebody else in the language. I think it was all written by the same person. So I believe it was Brian, and for other reasons as well that are on that first page there that we haven't got to when we look at the handwriting. But he's definitely in this, the way he starts this out, he's setting the tone for what he's going to write throughout the rest of this letter, if you will, of this note. And he is portraying himself as a romantic person, a good boyfriend, this person that people are, or that I think he really believes that people like him, and he wants people to like him. And so he's building himself up now. He's just beginning. He's just starting to build the narrative.
Okay. And
do you mind if I jump in with something, Eric?
Sure.
I'm probably going to drive Peter crazy with this, because I want to jump 3 lines from the end to a particular line. He said, when I did my first read through, there was a few things that jumped out at me.
Well, I kind of want to hold on.
Yeah.
I want to go through the whole thing.
You want to go through it?
Right. I don't want to jump to the end no, I don't want to do that, Gavin. So you'll drive me crazy.
Okay.
Let's go sequentially, because he wrote this in order. Why don't we read it in order? I think that'd be.
Yeah, no problem. We can do that.
Okay. So let's continue, because I know that. So this is the intro and a lot of eyes. Mm-hmm. Then he kind of shifts with if you were reading, and what is there some meaning there, Peter? What is that all about?
Yeah, and you're right. The heavy pronoun use tells us that we're going to get from this reliable information. Even if he's lying, he's going to give us reliable information because he is psychologically present here. And so even when someone is lying, and this is why we call everything autobiographical, even if someone is deceiving, they're still revealing things about themselves that we're able to glean, even in the point where we're able to discern truth from deception. So this is very heavily about him, strong use of pronoun I. So for the good, for the bad, for the ugly, Brian is presenting himself. And he's beginning with a kind of a romantic view. I wish I was right at your side. This is being said from someone that wanted to get rid of her. He wanted to be done. He wanted to silence her. Eric, I've seen some really insightful or pithy comments from those who have been looking at this case, and they recognize, and I think some of them do a good job with it, there may have been a jealousy that he had, besides just the insecurities and everything else. And I think there may even be premeditation that we can look at. But for the beginning, it's I can't live without you. I wish you were right by my side, or I was right by your side, excuse me. Mm-hmm. This from a person that killed her, who didn't want to live with her. I've lost every day we could have spent together. What did she lose? Is there empathy for what she went through at this point? There's not. There's lots of for himself. What we're looking at is Brian Laundrie's perception of self and how he wants to be seen by others. People don't always see the same things in the mirror that we see when we look at them. I've lost every day we could have spent together, every holiday. I'll never get to play with whoever that was. Never go hiking with TJ. I loved you more than anything. And so he is now giving this lamentation of his losses that he deliberately caused because he wanted to.
Right.
So we're looking at someone who is saying to you, I am by nature a fraud. It is who I am.
Yeah, somebody in the chat pointed out, and this is something I noticed too, because I'm sitting there trying to go, through myself, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, circle, circle, circle. My circle, 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 circle. Okay, good God. And somebody in the chat said, I don't think I've ever seen 4 eyes in a sentence before. It is a really salient point that is that not an unusual number of eyes, like a total eye focus? I'm asking, all 3 of you on that, because I would expect something like, I wish I was by your side and we were doing something. It's like, it's so self-focused that he's not bringing her into it. He's like talking at her. Or is it just me?
No, you're correct. He's not having that empathy with her, what she went through with the supposed falling in the water and that sort of thing. This is, and he's making the declaration. So when we look at the first I, where I wish, what we ask analysts to do is believe him.
Mm-hmm.
Trust the language to guide you. He's going to tell you everything you need to know in this rather large snapshot of a note that he wrote. And Steve will be able to tackle some of the handwriting points that I think are quite relevant. So I miss you. I will miss out on this. I will miss out on that. Everything is about him.
Mm-hmm.
He's the center of it. And he's about to portray himself. And Steve is correct with the idea of a good guy. He's going to be the center of this melodramatic event that he's describing to us in a very unreliable way, the event itself. So it's going to be interesting. He's someone that I think is very smooth at this, that knew what he was doing, and probably has a history of getting away with things repeatedly. And he has an expectation. He's going to put one over now, even. Another point, if I could, Eric, is
yes.
I mentioned this previously. And, this is one of those things that people repeat. And if people repeat enough, everyone believes it. He's too narcissistic. He's too selfish to commit suicide. And that isn't true. Not only because in the rearview mirror we can see he did commit suicide, but to consider from his perspective, he is the center of this universe. She's been murdered and her body laid out for the wildlife to come and take care of. But he's concerned about himself, his feelings, his image, what he won't have. And what happens is someone that's that selfish, that focused upon their own life, what they're saying is, I am the most important person in the universe. There's none like me. I am everything here, which has to come from childhood. And I cannot allow the most important person in the universe to suffer the indignation, violence, and humiliation of what awaits me in prison.
Mm-hmm. It's also a punishment on the world to take the most important person in the universe away from them.
It is. And I think it may be here, which is a great point, maybe something towards his mom, which we'll get to it towards the end.
Okay. Yeah, I completely back up what Peter says. I agree with absolutely everything. I'm not sure about his system, but when I start doing this, that's my starting point is the pronouns. I go through a circle each and every one of them. It's funny that in this document, the pronouns I, me, and my, there's actually 72 of them in comparison to the pronouns we, where there's 4. So that tells you a lot more about the kind of the value of himself in comparison to how he sees the value of the relationship.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another thing too, I don't know if you're able to pop a screen up of that first page that we're talking about here, the handwriting, but
that's exactly what I was just going to do, Steve, was go back and forth because the handwriting, I think, supplements.
If you look at that, look at how those eyes really stand out. It is not uncommon for when I've looked at just hundreds of handwriting samples, examples from people that have been depressed, suicidal, euphoric about their crimes they're committing, everything in between. And it is not uncommon actually for people to put lowercase i's when they really don't feel that good about themselves. He has committed one of the most heinous crimes that we can imagine. Already he's done it. And now he's writing this note, and look how pronounced those i's are. They're much larger than all the other writing, even in the down slants and like the D's and the T's, and those i's, they just stand out by themselves. And so it's an indication that he really thinks something about himself. It's a very good indicator. And they're not light i's. They're thick and they have pressure. He feels pretty good about himself.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And if you look at line number 11, for example, to like kind of cement what we've said here, not just with the pronoun use, on line number 11, he says, "I'm so very sorry to everyone this will affect." Sorry, I'm reading the wrong bit here. "I'm so very sorry to her family because I love them." That in itself, that very line shows, that a narcissistic personality trait that he's got there. And the word narcissistic does get thrown around a lot, I know, but there's definitely that's just one example of many signs of narcissistic traits in this entire document.
Okay, now while we're here, because I think this is a good point, to kind of cover multiple things at once. One thing that stood out to me, and I think many people who saw this, and I think Steve can address this, you have an upward slant, which I believe is optimistic quite often in views. And then you have this rounding, and then every other page is neat. So the first page, it almost looks like the notebook was held on somebody's leg or something, or there's confusion about it. Why is this page different than the others? And that caused people, I feel, to feel like maybe this is written in two different settings, two different time periods. What is going on with the slanting, etc.?
Yeah, that's good. That's a really good question. And this page is pretty revealing. So as we already talked about, he starts out by writing this page to Gabby. This is the only page that is addressed to Gabby. Once we get beyond this, it's obviously addressed to everybody else, whoever else he thinks will be reading this letter. And so this page here, talking to Gabby, and he starts out as this, as you mentioned already, this good person, kind of in a cinematic type language, building himself up, almost building this euphoria, if you will, of what the relationship could have, would have been like, and this dreamy thing. And so what he's doing here is he is in his uphill, the ascending baseline. You see it goes up above the printed line on that lined notebook paper, and he starts out writing up above across that line. And this often is seen as a positive thing. A lot of CEOs, a lot of very powerful people, they write uphill, they write across the printed lines because the lines don't have any meaning for them. Those lines represent the rules that we are supposed to put ourselves in, on that baseline, that printed line, and write right there. And they don't care. They write up across it. And so he's obviously not a CEO type person, but he is one that when it comes to Gabby, the rules do not apply to him.
Steve, do celebrities do that as well?
What's that?
I understand that celebrities do that as well quite often.
I don't know. I haven't looked at many celebrity handwriting.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Anyone that feels, that they're going to get things done. It could be two different things. Someone that is going to get things done and really go somewhere, and you also have the other people that just will not abide by the rules. So you kind of have two different things, and sometimes they mesh, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it becomes a bad thing, and other times it's a good thing. So we just have to take everything into context when we're looking at that.
Well, I
And
asked because he was a social media star in his mind, as far as I know. Like Gabby Petito, they both were kind of big on social media. So I didn't know if the celebrity factor could have come into it. Like I am a big time social media person, dude.
that's a good question, and I don't know. I would like to see something in the language itself to indicate that, but what I can say is that he, in his mind, at this point where he is riding uphill, he's either trying to be upbeat, or in his mind he's thinking the rules don't apply, as he's thinking about Gabby, and so he crosses those lines, uh, uh, those barriers, if you will, and she's trying to be upbeat. Now, like we said, this is the only page that's written to Gabby. And as he's writing this, he doesn't get very far. And all of a sudden, the writing takes a turn. And, and we go from this ascending uphill slant to this convex. He starts to write uphill. And then all of a sudden, it tapers off and it goes downhill to this descending baseline. And when it gets to this descending, let me just back up a little bit. If it was just a slightly convex handwriting and he was consistent with that, I would say that he had this trait where it's someone that really can't be counted upon. It's an interesting trait, but we have more going on here. And what I'm looking at is, is this an indication of him taking his own life, that he has that mentality, that he's to that point where he would actually do that? And a typical suicidal baseline is that the lines, as someone is writing, they will write, and then all of a sudden the last couple letters will just fall off. It's like they can't continue it on. Well, he has a little more going on here. He's actually riding uphill, and he's in his mind, he's kind of a bigger person. Like with the eyes, he's a big person, and so he's writing these sentences, whole lines, but he can't even continue. It's a small notebook as well. It's not very much to write, but he can't even continue on with the whole line across that notebook, and it tapers off and it goes downhill into this depressive slant. And so it's actually a pretty good indicator that he actually did have this suicidal tendency, this trait in his mind at that particular time, as he's addressing Gabby. He's reminiscing about Gabby. There's something going on. That's the catalyst that makes him contemplate the suicide. And I think it's, I'm not going to say that he's depressed that Gabby is gone, but certainly that as we look at more of the statement analysis, what the words mean, I think we might see that he will probably blame this on Gabby. And as he's blaming it on Gabby, and he's thinking about Gabby, it becomes this depressive mood for him, this depressive feeling. And he knows it's not going to continue. I can't continue this on. And that's why we see this slant. So what we have here is an indication that he likely did have the thought of taking his life at that point in time.
Okay. And because the other pages are all even, that would rule out or make it less likely that it was written over his leg.
Yeah, here's the thing, is that we don't know. The unknown here is,
sure, did
he write one page at one point in time and then put it aside and come back and write the rest of it later? Was it segmented? We don't know that. Certainly the surface that he's writing on will make a difference in how this comes out. But the fact that he was able to write uphill for how many lines, 8 or 9 lines, and then it just started tapering off. I don't think that it really made that big a difference for him. I think that this was whatever surface he was on, and it didn't make a difference. I think it's not because of the surface that's causing that descending slant. I think it was, because that's a big slant, and it's a big difference, and it's not that big a page, so it's a fairly small notebook, and so I don't think that that's the cause for that descending baseline there.
I have something in the chat too to point out really quickly. Tyler Sturden is pointing out the moisture. The moisture, I believe, was caused because the notebook was not found until he had already, let's just say he was decomposing for a while, and it was out in the elements. So I think that's where some of the ink problems and moisture just came from the elements. I'm sorry, go ahead, Gavin.
I was going to ask Steve what the significance was between the tight left-hand margin where he started and the gap down the right-hand side. There seems to be a long, mostly even gap all down the right-hand margin, and he's very, tight starting on the left. There's not an even gap either side. I do remember reading something about it once, but I just wondered if you could enlighten me.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because he knows that he can't fit most of those other words in on that right-hand margin, so he appropriately goes back to the left-hand margin. But it's a small page in and of itself, and but typically when you have people that write close to that left margin, they're sticking close to their past, and it's so he's endeared to his past. If I saw this and let's say that, for instance, this was a handwriting sample that came from an escaped convict. Okay. And so they want to know, hey, what can you tell us about this escaped convict? I would say, well, he's probably going to stay close to things that he knows, things that he's familiar with, home, family, friends. That's where you want to concentrate, because that's where he's going to gravitate to. If he had more a large space on that left margin, I would say he's perfectly fine going away from that which he knows, and that he's not really close to the past. And so that's one of those indicators. What we see here is when you see that tight left margin, that he's endeared to things from his past, such as the family.
Thank you.
And it could be Gabby too.
Okay, I'm going to jump back to the this for Peter. So to statement analysis, because we're going into the shift, I think.
Well, Steve deals with two disciplines that can create pressure. And because he's skilled in both disciplines, the pressure is allowed to resolve itself. So what he's given us in the handwriting is someone who may be somewhat optimistic and upbeat, driving, as he talks about himself, and then despair. But I want to choose my words carefully on this. The Brian Laundrie suicide note may not be a suicide note. I think that there is a very strong presupposition in this letter that he's writing in case he goes through with it. He doesn't give us a strong linguistic commitment, I am going to kill myself. He gives us indications of it, and we have concern over it. But I think that there were weeks of time that was elapsing, and I don't know when he wrote this, when he may have been given hope by his family of escaping justice, or at least minimizing justice. And someone that is not going to allow himself to go to prison, he may end up having to commit suicide, and he did. But he didn't give a strong commitment to it. What he's telling us to start off with is how much he likes himself. Gavin pointed out this one before. I'm so very sorry to her family because I love them. Now let me read that again. I'm so very sorry to her family because I killed her. I took away their daughter, their auntie. I took away from them by my actions. No, he actually is the center of this.
Yeah.
Is the reason I'm sorry is because I love them so much, as if that would be something they would value at this moment in time. So remember, his parents were not cooperative when Gabby was first reported missing, and he had gone there, and there was contact with them. And I think this note has a lot unsaid. There's plenty there for us to pull apart, but there's a lot unsaid that would be understood by the unintended recipient, in particular, his mother. His mother. And so I have believed from the beginning that the mother tried to orchestrate escape or minimization. I think that Gabby was indeed, as you said earlier, blamed. And I think that what Steve is looking at in the handwriting is consistent with the language of someone that is losing hope, someone that knows it's not a done deal that I'm going to escape justice or that my mother will be able to get me out of this. And so that can come in. So it's not strictly a strong commitment to suicide. He did commit suicide, but I think there was negotiation going on before this with his parents on how he might be able to escape or minimize a domestic violence event that went wrong. Time had to be bought so that her body would decompose even more so. So I think there's much more to this than what initially meets the eye.
That's true. Well, he was on the run before she was even found.
Yes.
So that might have been a factor as well. Okay, so back to that. So we've got the if you were, which I thought was very weird that he changed out from himself to you, which I'm not sure which is you. I'm guessing that's us probably, and not really his parents, because he'd probably say mom or dad, da 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 da. He's not saying that.
Yeah, he's socializing that. It's everybody, and I think that he knows that this is likely going to be read by a lot of different people, and which is another indicator that, in my mind, that he knows that that he had help, that he knows that his family, at least, it will probably get this out to whoever it is that they had talked about reading this letter.
So looking. Oh, sorry, Peter. Go ahead.
I agree, Steve, and I think that he was aware through his mother or parents. He was aware of how intense the news was about all this. The intensity of the following of people that wanted to know what happened and wanted Gabby found, and the provocative nature of not taking the phone calls from Gabby's parents. Those are the acts of guilty people.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very intense. And I think, like many things in life, there was internal debate going on during this. But he is determined to be portrayed as the good guy. If there's anything that he can draw hope from that, he can do it as, I was good to her. And we're going to see that as it unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody had a good term for it in the chat that their friend said is perception management versus an off yourself note.
Yeah. That's what I was going to pretty much say. Yeah, with the if you look at the kind of personality type of the writer of this note, we've already established that they have narcissistic tendencies. I believe to a degree, they have a level of what some people would describe as maybe being some kind of a control freak, and this allows them to have that level of control after they've gone. So after they've done the act, it allows them to say, well, at least now with this note, people might leave my family alone. They might do this. They might understand my point of view. They might, and because he knows he's not going to be called up for an interview afterwards, and this is his only way. And to a degree, it's working, or even having the opposite effect with the fact that we're here discussing it now. But it does give that element of control after he's left that I think he was probably trying to cling on to, and like was very well pointed out by somebody, that perception management. which I think is a big thing. I think image is a huge thing to this guy.
Okay, so let's jump forward. I think that this is a part that everyone really wants to know about, where he's describing, quote unquote, and I'm going to say quote unquote because I have trouble accepting exactly what he's saying here. And I don't know if we should do this with this or the handwriting, or actually, why don't we go to the handwriting of it? Let me see if you're reading. And that there is actually a cross out at that point too. Is there any meaning about crossing out this section here, Steve? I didn't know if you paid attention.
Well, there's a lot to handwriting analysis, and
sure.
One of the main things that I do as statement analyst and handwriting analyst is I look for deception, and we can typically see the deception in the handwriting in different ways. And one of the number one tells of deception is an indication of stress within the brain. Deception creates stress. When we're telling the truth, we're describing something that we experienced, something that happened in the past tense, and we're just relaying that information. Our words are smooth, our language is concise and simple and to the point, and our handwriting is also the same. There's no interruption in it. We don't feel that stress. We're just writing out what happened. And it's, it is normal for people to, especially when we're speaking about what happened, it takes more effort to write things out. It takes more time and thought process to write things out. So we have more time doing that. When I'm speaking, my brain will get ahead of me, and I'll often think, oh, I want to go to that. And I jump around like a squirrel sometimes, chasing squirrels. And so my language gets a little segmented, and that's normal. That's how humans speak. When we write something on a notebook like this, it takes more time and effort. And typically when we see things that are crossed out, it's an indication that our writing took control, and we wrote something that we really shouldn't have written if we didn't want to portray the whole truth. And so what I'm saying is it's one of the number one signs of deception when people start crossing things out and they make mistakes. It's like it's a hiccup in the cogs of the wheel in the brain spinning, and it's like a wrench being thrown in there, and it creates this mistake. It's a hiccup. And so people will start crossing things out. When it's a lot of crossing out like this, I would say his writing got ahead of him. The writing will take control. The more it's like giving somebody, there's an old adage, give somebody enough rope to hang themselves.
Sure.
And that's kind of when you give them a pen and paper and you say, hey, write it out. Tell me what happened. And they start writing. I guarantee that the writing will get ahead of them. It'll get a hold of it. It will take control. And the more that they write, the more that will come out, and they will write things that they don't even realize they're writing sometimes. That happens quite a bit. And they will write things that they wouldn't speak verbally to other people. And an example I use is on social media. There's things that people write in social media that they really wouldn't speak to somebody else, but they feel emboldened by themselves, just at their computer and their laptop. And so they will write things that they wouldn't normally speak. And so when people start writing things out, it becomes almost therapeutic. And oftentimes, I've heard Peter tell a couple stories like this, that people that have suicidal tendencies, when they start writing out their note, it becomes therapeutic for them. And when they get done, they've written several pages, and they feel better, and they've got it out, and it's therapeutic for them. And so that's what happens. The writing just takes control. I think what he did right there is he wrote something that he didn't intend to write and that he didn't want people to know about. And it was like, after he realized he did it, he's like, oh, I got to cross that out. And
he really crossed it out, though. He didn't just line through. He smeared it out.
Yeah, he really did. That's an indication I really don't want anybody to see this or know it. But if you look at the handwriting above it compared to the handwriting below it, see how different it is?
Mm-hmm.
And so the handwriting below that, to me, is a sign of deceptive handwriting. I am sorry to my family. This is a shock to them. And I'm looking at this and how segmented it is. It doesn't flow. There's a lot of space in between it. And so what's happening is there's the stress in his brain has got to him. His pen is moving along the paper and it's still moving, yet he's paused and thinking, what am I writing here? And when somebody writes something that is deceptive, it causes pause in the brain. And yet the hand is still moving with the pen in hand. And so it creates this spacing between the words and sometimes between the letters within the words. And it comes out looking like this. You have this spacing between the words. So, and it doesn't flow. And the writing up above it, there's a nice rightward slant. And in this one below, that rightward slant disappears and it becomes erratic and it's segmented. That word grief, that very last word on the page, look at the spacing between the letters in that word. And you couple that with the spacing between the words just right above the word grief. It was segmented. There's stress in his brain. And so that's very typical of something that's deceptive. I don't think that it was a shock to his family. I just don't think it was by what this is a type of it's a tell. We're putting several different disciplines together here. The psychology, the statement analysis, the psycholinguistic analysis, and the body language of the handwriting, if you will. It's the personality. It's the traits coming out in the handwriting, and so it's a type of a body language that gives them away.
Okay, and so we continue to hear, and then let's see if he evens out a little bit. Looks like he started to even back out here.
It evened out, but if you skip down towards the bottom, or not towards the middle, where he says, "I hear a splash and a scream," you see how the words, how the spacing increased between those words.
Here we go. This is exactly what I wanted to cover next. So perfect.
Yeah.
So we could do it here, Peter, or we could do it on yours. Is either one good, or how do you want to start on this section?
Oh, it's fine either way.
Okay. Now this just, I know that you guys are going to start shredding it. I can see problems in there. I hear a splash. What? All this is very odd. And I definitely want you to talk a little bit about water, Peter, because I know you definitely cover some of that. So
remember, we don't want to divorce ourselves from the introduction that he gave. He's about to introduce the unexpected tragedy. And this is where Steve's two disciplines come together and do so well, as he allows any tension to be resolved in the context, in the handwriting, in the analysis of the wording that's chosen. So what he tells us is that this is Gabby's fault. Before he gets to the story, he's telling us that. He talked about, I'm sorry to everyone this will affect. Gabby was the love of my life. So I'm sorry to everyone who will be impacted by this, everyone that will be affected. Gabby was the love of my life, which means I'm affected like you all are. He's putting himself there. And what he's doing in a very subtle way, and I think that probably if his mother ever comes clean, I think the conversations did go and blame Gabby. And what he's been doing is presenting himself as a really good person. He's even concerned after all this that the family doesn't get bothered. They don't be troubled any further than what's going on. So he's so good that he even considers her younger siblings his best of friends. This is how wonderful he is. And then sandwiched again with, I'm sorry. Someone's to blame for all this, and it's not him in his perspective. And then this is where Steve was. This is a shock to them as well as a terrible grief. Okay? That's an unnecessary statement. So as Steve is looking at the handwriting and we're considering how he unfolds himself, this should give an indication that not only did the family know, which I would like to, for the sake of the recording, exclude Brian's sister Cassie. I believe she was telling the truth and she was not privy to any of these.
She was cooperating. Well, nobody else was too, right?
Yes.
That's a good sign.
So. They loved as much, if not more than me. So I want you to know, it's very important that you know that they didn't know this happened, that it'll be a shock to them, which is a signal telling us of an unnecessary statement, making it very important to him. And he goes back and hits again. Please do not make this harder for them. So the murderer is really concerned for the feelings of others. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. And so here we have twice the same type of theme of not knowing, which suggests to me some measure and some level of time passing of premeditation. That he was going to snap if she goes to a certain point so far. Now from it's a shock and it's unexpected and it's a tragedy, which is something that you're not responsible for personally. He then goes into an account without the pronoun I, and we see things simply in the language itself that shows that this does not come from experiential memory. He's not telling the truth. He's not reporting what happened. This is fiction. And the language reflects that. And so what he does is, I'm setting up how wonderful I am. I am going to clear my family. So I'm going to say that they didn't have any knowledge of this at all. You know, the flight in and some of the complaining that he did and the conversations with his mother and that sort of thing. No, I don't want you to know any about that. But I can't help but give it away because I need to persuade you that they didn't know. And then he goes into the account. He begins the way he didn't begin before. Everything was I. Now he begins with the element of time passing. Not with this is what happened, not with his psychological present. Rushing back to our car, that's time. Rushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams. And I asked a simple question, who is trying to cross the streams? He doesn't tell us. He's not present here. Of Spread Creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. We have no people involved in this part. We have no humans. We have no commitment. There's no linguistic commitment to his presence or her presence in this. And then what he does goes the opposite way. I hear a splash and a scream. So he puts this in the present tense. He's no longer in past tense language of a past tense event, which enough time has, I believe, elapsed for him to have processed it all. So I don't think this is trauma at all. And then we have splash first and then scream.
Yeah, another point on the tense, Peter, is my parents died in 2015 as an example. My wife kind of gets on my case a little bit because I talk about them in present tense sometimes. I just slip in. I don't know what it is. It's something that reminds me of, obviously, I know they died, etc. He has no trouble saying that Gabby has died, but yet he's having trouble mixing up the tenses here.
Yeah, with the verb tense, someone can be trying to keep a memory alive like that, but think about the involvement. So if someone I love died of cancer, speaking so fondly, I may slip into present tense. But if I killed them, it's much different. There's an event to look back at, an event that you can never forget, an event of such hormonal consequence that there really will be an imprint for the rest of one's life. And that's why people turn heavily substance abuse to try to get that out. So this is something that he did, which he removes himself from. And now he gets in and he reverses really scream and splash, because the most important thing was the love of your life, the one who you would go over every memory, who you want to be with today. You're going to give me splash before scream? You're going to give me splash? It's not even necessary. It would be Gabby, the love of my life's voice, screaming for help.
Mm-hmm.
That would be something of an impact. Instead, he's present tense. So I'm on the lookout now for storytelling, for narrative building. Because remember, he introduced this this idea of romantic, wonderful person that he is, and how much he's hurting and how much he's suffering. And then he goes into the present tense here. He's going to make sure that his responsibility is removed and that the hero emerges even more clearly. Because, he's very concerned with everyone's feelings. He's concerned about the family. He's concerned about everyone, even lobbying to, leave his family alone. But now he is the center of this fraudulent story, this deceptive story that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to back you up. I was going to back up your point, Peter, with how with the fraudulent, the deception and the splash and the scream and the priority there. I hear a splash, and look how weakly written splash is versus scream. You see that there's a huge difference. Scream is, there's a lot of pressure that he's put into that, and it really stands out. And when I see things like that regarding a story of someone being killed, I think he did hear a scream, but that wasn't that's not the most important thing in his narrative. He hears a splash and a scream. And I agree 100% with Peter. He is trying to absolve himself of responsibility for this, because the next thing he does, connected with this fraudulent, I hear a splash and a scream, is he says, I could barely, and he makes or is that hardly? I don't know if that was hardly or barely. That's at that last word there on that line below splash.
Let me see the other.
It's
Peter, can
barely.
you scroll? Is it barely?
Barely, yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Whatever it is, barely, hardly. The ink is obviously, it runs together. He spent a lot of time. His brain has paused right there when he's saying, after he's thinking about scream, and then he's trying to absolve himself, and he says, I could barely or hardly, whatever it is, whatever it is, I couldn't. He's taken responsibility away from him because I couldn't see, is what he's trying to say. And then he says, I couldn't find her for a moment. So this is his attempt of absolving himself of whatever happened to Gabby, because, hey, it's not my fault. I couldn't do this. But his brain paused there. And that's an indication to me that his brain knows the truth, but yet he's going contrary to what that truth is. And that creates stress. And that's how stress manifests in his handwriting. Now I know how stress manifests, how those deception manifests in his handwriting, and it won't change. It's going to be the same. He throughout all his handwriting, he puts spacing between the words, and he crosses out, and he makes mistakes, and that's, everyone displays a little bit different, but that's how Brian Laundrie does. And so anytime I pick up any of his handwriting, I'll know, oh, here it is again. And I know that that's deception. That's how he displays it. So it totally backs up what Peter was saying. And that's what's so great about putting the two disciplines together, is one backs up the other. If it doesn't, we go back to the drawing board and figure out, well, okay, let's figure this out again. Let's look at the words a little bit more careful. And we figure it out. But in all the time that Peter and I have been doing this, we've never had one that, when done correctly, we tether ourselves to the principles. They always mesh. They always mesh, and they back each other up.
If I could go back to the point of time.
Yes.
So he's going to go into, after how wonderful he is, and try to convince us, try to persuade that this is a shock and unexpected instead of it being well known. He goes to time, rushing, talks about time, trying to cross, that's the passage of time. It got too dark. It got is the passage of time. Then we see this hint here. So why the emphasis upon time? Why is it so important to him? And I think that psychologically we can get it right here. Why is time so important? I hear a splash and a scream. Even these extra words here, unnecessary to say. He is slowing down the pace of the statement, because what he's saying isn't true, and it's stressful. It's causing him stress that he'd like to avoid. He loved this other stuff. He loved talking about himself and memories, and the memory of on the roof of the van, and all about himself, how much he loves others, and he's great with that. This is very stressful for him. And this is where the change comes in.
I think Gavin will probably jump on this too, but one thing, and I like that you're saying about the time and stuff. What I'm seeing here is word salad in my mind. And what I'm saying is that if you say something happened and you say this and then this, I can sit here and I can visualize. I can't visualize this. This is... It doesn't make sense. There's a splash and she's there. She's laying there. Was she laying on land? Was she laying in the water? How was she splashing? Did she fall? It's just, there's an utter vagueness there. And then you add in the elements of time, like you're saying, Peter. And I feel like it is just sort of like papering over and just throwing out some stuff here. But I don't necessarily know exactly what the hell what happened here.
Watch this now. The word salad, I like that expression, is you're back in high school and you've got to give an oral book report on a book you didn't read. We saw this in Casey Anthony. So if I make up a lot of details, everyone's got to believe me because there's so many details, which you went into absurdity. What he's doing here is basically buying time. He was much more comfortable talking about himself and how wonderful he is. And he'll get to that again. But this is an indication. What you're sensing, Eric, is this isn't coming from experience. This isn't what happened. If it was, it would be easy for him to say, even through tears, or in the sense writing, even through great upsetment, you would understand. The fact that you don't understand of what he's saying is because it's convoluted. It is not coming from the experiential memory of which flows so readily in language. And that's why you'll see over time, he goes out of sequential order even.
Yeah.
And it's not a parathentical view. He's out of order. It's not coming from experiential memory.
Well, there's this section. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Gavin.
I was going to say this section for me was probably the most pivotal part of the entire document, especially where you kicked off from earlier, where you said rushing back to our car. I'll come back to the fact that this was the last point that he said rushing back to our car, and then after that it becomes the car. And I'll come back to why that's so relevant. You guys already know why that's so relevant a little bit later on. But the bit where you were talking about saying, I hear a splash and a scream, if you can put yourself in a scenario for a moment where you can imagine they're rushing across the creek and he's evidently in front of her. If this were to be true, if you were to play this out as a scene, he's evidently in front of her because he's not able to see her. He heard the splash and the scream. If, like I say, if this was something that actually happened, which we are saying at the moment that it looks like it's fabricated. So if he was behind her, that means he's had to turn around, he's had to go back, he's had to find out where the splash and the scream came from and what happened, because he will have heard it. It's dark, he can't see her, he can't find her. He said he can't see her and he can't find her. He missed a pronoun where he said, I couldn't find her for a moment, shouted out her name instead of I shouted out her name. And then when he said he found her, he said she was breathing heavily. So what is important to me here in this section is not what he said, but what he hasn't said. Because he hasn't turned around and said, I heard a splash and a scream, so I turned around and panicked to find out what was going on or what had happened. That's completely missed out. And the only way that he wouldn't want to go back and find out what was happened is if he already knew. If he knew exactly what caused the splash and the scream. And so therefore, it's kind of, he's covering up the actual events. Like you say, Peter, he doesn't want to tell the truth. He wants to fabricate something that will kind of gloss over it. And it's very much a case of and you'll love the statement analysis example where the lady said, I went into the room, I heard a bang, my husband was dead, shot on the floor. The bit that's missing is the fact that she pulled the trigger. So you've got the same thing kind of here. He's heard this splash, he's heard this scream. There's nothing saying that he wasn't necessarily the one causing the splash and the scream. He's missed a lot of information out, and then gone straight back to previously, like backing up what you said about the sequential order of it all. We just came back from the blazing hot national parks, so he's gone forward in time and back in time. So that that tells me this entire event that you mentioned is either completely fabricated or at least covering up what really happened. Do you agree with that, Peter?
I do. In fact, that probably the next thing to look at with this, besides the description he's giving, is something that's quite inexact, but it's worth exploring. And that is the notion of leakage or latency in the language. Mm-hmm. One of you gentlemen said before that you believe that he did hear a scream. And I agree. I don't think it was here at all. I think what's happening here is as he's trying to give a cover story for what happened to Gabby, mm-hmm. he cannot keep out things that took place that left a tremendous hormonal imprint upon him, including her screams. Now it is not exact, and I expressed doubt over different times when a larger picture comes together, especially when we look in the rearview mirror, looking at what the injuries that she suffered from and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We're able to put those things together. We do explore for the fact that he probably did hear her scream, and she probably screamed for her life.
Yeah, probably after he hit her.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I mean, if we're going to be specific, he probably hit her and she fell down into the water, very possibly.
Yeah, I think he targeted her head. I think he targeted her mouth or neck. I think he had to silence her.
This is obviously a certain amount of speculation because I'm kind of reading between the lines here a little bit, but obviously, I'm like taking what is there and looking at the fact that there are a lot of gaps and missing bits of information. Like, you know, and I definitely agree with what Peter said as well about this being premeditated. Which, when we come to it a little bit later, you know, I'll explain why.
Yeah, you know, one other thing too, we kind of crossed or glossed over what he said in the beginning. He says, rushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams of Spread Creek before it got too dark to see. Mm-hmm. And he's telling us that it's at this point in time, it's not too dark to see and not too cold. And so we can't let go of that, because what's going to happen coming up in his story is his whole story is going to revolve around it being so cold. This cold is going to be the center of the reason. It's going to be his reason why he did what he did, because it was too cold and Gabby was so cold. So we can't let go of that. And we kind of brushed over that, but it's going to be important coming up. And I agree with the timing aspect, Peter, that you're talking about, is that timing is key to this. And I also agree with the deceptive nature of this. This is not experiential memory. It's very much what we see in people that are making something up. I love that analogy of someone trying to give a book report that didn't read the book. It's exactly what he's doing. And he's making it up based on, he's pulling words out of experience, but things that he didn't actually experience. Here, this is not, it's deceptive here, but he can't help but create this statement here based on things that he knows, and he's going to bring those words into it. And I think that's where that scream comes from. And he's trying to, that it was important to the narrative before it got too dark to see, too cold. Because what's he going to do? He's going to say, I couldn't see her. I couldn't find her. And then now it's coming up in a little bit. She was so cold. She was freezing cold. And that's going to be the crux, his why for what he did. So,
yeah, it's interesting. It's actually the very next sentence. In one sentence, it's saying it's light enough to see before it gets dark to see. In the very next sentence, it's saying he couldn't see her. That's interesting too. The going with what Peter said about time, when he starts the sentence, rushing back to our car, implies that there was some kind of time constraint for them to need to get back to the car. I know he's saying before it gets too light and dark. Perhaps they were rowing on the way, and this is why it's taking a lot longer to get to the car than what it was. I think there's possibly some time passed here, or a lot more time passed here than what he gives you the impression has.
All right.
If this can help as an analogy, I did something terrible. So when this terrible event took place, and I was physically doing things, so I'm physically engaged, there is a hormonal response, a rush of adrenaline like no other time in life. This is committing a murder. Now I want to give a cover story so I don't get in trouble, or even if I am going to die, I want to be remembered as a good guy. So I want to give a cover story. So memory, I've got to be careful to try to stay away from it, but it has to be memory of something. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm stealing a line from Hollywood, Billie Jean Dunn did that with her missing daughter. She was actually repeating a story that she had read in the book or had seen on TV. If I'm getting this from a movie, if I'm getting this from a book, if I'm getting this from a news article, I can stick to that. It's memory. It's not experiential memory. It's memory. Now remember, I did something terrible, unique, murder, not common at all. As I'm giving a fraudulent story, the words have to come from somewhere. And what happens is things that really took place, things that greatly impressed me because I was there and experienced it, have a way of slipping into the language that can reveal what truly took place.
No, the best way to lie is to have partial truth. I mean,
yeah.
I forget the terms, but either way, I love the how they make people swear before testimony. They say 3 ways: swear to tell the truth, okay, the whole truth. So you're not going to leave anything out on me, and nothing but the truth. And that really does cover it.
If I can go back in my mind and repeat what happened in a movie, I'm going to be pretty safe. But it's very difficult to do that if you've been actually involved in a crime where you have been through what really is traumatic, even if it was, if it gave you a rush even. So it's very difficult, very challenging, and that's why it sounds so awkward, and that's why he's spreading out time. He's trying to buy himself time to fill in the words. Even a rehearsed scripted language requires memory, but it also requires an attempt to avoid the experiential memory of what you went through in order to stay to the scripted language. That's why you'll hear sometimes someone repeat something which you already said that, you're repeating it unnecessarily. It is as if you don't want to go off script. And that's how we end up picking up scripted language.
By the way, that's a good way to catch psychopaths. Because while they're not going to give a lot of emotion, they have to get a script right. And it really messes with them if you're like, so what happened before that? What happened before that? What happened before? Okay, can you tell me what happened before that?
It's stressful.
Right, because you're telling it backward. So they've got this whole perfectly rehearsed story and script, and you're like, okay, good. Now, what was that again beforehand? But okay,
yeah,
so
the example before you can have something that you know extremely intimately, like the alphabet, for example, that everybody can say forwards with great ease. So you try saying it backwards, and it's a hell of a lot harder.
Yeah.
Here's a crazy question from the chat, and then we'll jump forward. On a scale of Jussie Smollett to Amber Heard, where does Laundrie fall? You know, that is really a hard one because we're talking about 2 different things in the sense that Laundrie actually killed somebody. So this is not a lightweight situation. But it is interesting. I would say that they're probably the bigger liars than he is, but I don't know for sure. I mean, he's lying to cover up a deed. I don't know what else. The other 2 created a lie from nothing. They created an entire fiction to put something out there, whereas Laundrie did something and he's lying to cover it up. And a lot of what he's saying is probably truthful. You know how he feels. His narcissism seems truthful.
He can't continue it. He can't keep it going. He can't maintain the lie. So I think that Laundrie is the least of the. He's not a skilled liar like the others would be.
No, but definitely some strong narcissistic traits in there.
Okay, so moving forward, we've got the well, now we've gone back in time with the Utah drop temperature, and then here we go. Peter, I'm sure you're going to take it away here. His heroism. He's carrying her as far as he can down the stream.
Do you remember a case years ago where a husband and wife were at, I think, Falcon Lake in Texas, and they were on jet skis, and 3 boats started chasing them and shooting at them and all that? What was really interesting about that, and the wife was lying, the husband was shot and killed in what I believe was a drug purchase gone wrong, but she gave an account of letting him go and sinking away in the water because she could hear God telling her that's what she needed to do, that sort of thing. She was being deceptive. She was using the remake of the movie Titanic.
I was going to say, it sounded cinematic. I mean, and there's cinematic elements here. I mean, definitely the carrying and even later, I know that is what Gavin's wanting is, champing at the bit to get to, but it very much feels cinematic. So I'm not going to go into it until we get to it. We'll get there, but yes, this is definitely the dramatic moment is coming up on why things had to happen.
And in this very moment, we see him giving his emotions into it, adding his emotions in it. It's especially with a traumatic event, it's a very strong signal of artificial editing in emotions. That's something that you would not be able to talk about for quite some time. And you'll see it in the language here. This is why it sounds like a movie script or a play. We had just come from the blazing hot national parks in Utah. The temperature had dropped, again, the passing of time, and all this extra detail, unnecessary detail of what happened, had dropped to freezing, and she was soaking wet. I carried her as far as I could down the stream towards the car. Again, all unnecessary language, stumbling, exhausted, in shock. And if he had been alive and we were able to interview him, I think we would have found what movie this came from. When my knees buckled, that's usually an expression of fear, and knew I couldn't safely carry her. So he's right now in the center. He has already introduced himself as the good guy, and he is now the hero in a fantasy that has no basis in truth. No basis in truth. That's why you have the artificial editing of emotions, you have the unnecessary details, and you have a continued slowing of the pace here.
Yeah, and I would want to ask him, okay, so you carried her downstream. So you were in the stream? Or you walking in the water? Or was it splashing? Wait, how are you doing this? Mm-hmm. Where did you start the fire? Didn't you need to be on the land to start the fire? I mean, there's just, I want
to ask him, did you really bring this book?
Right.
You got to remember the movie Platoon. Was it? Oh no, it might have been a game back in the 80s, Platoon, where he kind of falls to his knees and he's got his arms up in the air like that, and it's silhouetted. Do you remember that by any chance?
Yes, Samuel Barber music playing, the adagio for strings in the background, and it was all.
Yeah, sounds about right. I reckon that's like kind of what he's recreating here. If he might kind of fall into his knees in the stream, like that kind of same kind of heroic kind of image he's trying to portray there.
He's allowing us to pity him.
Mm-hmm.
She's been murdered, but we're going to pity him.
Yeah.
Which is, and I believe he was a genuine narcissist, but the narcissistic language will sometimes betray someone that doesn't have good self-awareness of how they come across to others. And he is a shining example of this. It's almost as if to say, do you realize, can you control this? Do you see how creepy you come across to others? And the answer is no, he doesn't. And everyone can be in this terrible cringe moment, and he thinks everything is fine. That's why I think he's had some good practice, which, by the way, Eric, that chat question was a good question. I think he's had quite a bit of practice in terms of growing up and getting away with things, not facing natural consequences.
Oh, yeah, he's got enablers. I mean, back to my celebrity thing, but similar to that, like a celebrity, like you have Howard Stern. He's going to run for president now, right? He doesn't like what's going on, so he's going to be president. I'm like, really? I'm in a packed up court. I'll have 40 justices. I can't, you just look at some of these people, and it's like, okay, you never had anybody tell you no. And I think that Brian probably has been indulged, enabled for whatever reason. The actions of his parents, I think, lead credence to that point. They knew where he was. The fact is, he didn't show up. And then finally, it was like the parents suddenly get up in the morning and they go, let's go for a hike. Oh, voila. In no time, they find him. How would they know to look there? They're just genius, intrepid investigators. I mean, it felt like, and I think this is where you were going, Peter, that maybe there was already communication between him and them, that if they didn't hear from him or whatever, then he had taken himself out. And they had a pretty good idea where he would be.
I think so. I think they showed that when they went there.
Like a dead man's switch, so to speak.
Yeah, they had, I believe, many conversations, lengthy conversations that Cassie wasn't privy to.
Oh, I'm sure
after,
that.
Yeah, after Gabby was already dead.
All right, so keep going because I know that we're running long on this, and we've got another cross out. Oops. I don't know what was. I'm. He's continuing this narrative, and I'm just saying the narrative just doesn't make any sense. The whole thing of she couldn't tell me what hurt, but then her feet hurt, her wrist hurt. She was freezing, so she couldn't tell him, but she could psychically transfer.
That's why I think that he targeted her mouth or neck to stop her from speaking.
And that fits the MO. If you're when we're looking at violent crimes, I mean, I had a 28-year police career and I worked violent crimes a lot. And when you see a crime like that, typically if it's a DV, domestic violent type homicide, it is, the injuries are going to be very personal. The head and upper torso is going to be very personal, and it's going to be, if it's we're going to have multiple wounds to the head and torso area, and it's just going to be like over the top. And for whatever reason, that's how domestic violent homicides end up. So that's, if we come up on a scene and we see that, that's one of the things that we're going to think right away, is that this is someone that's close to this female victim because of the injuries like that. So just flip that in reverse. And if you don't know, and you're trying to profile how are we going to find her, that's a very good indication of what the injuries are going to be like. Very personal.
That cross out too happens after talking about this mysterious small bump on her forehead, and then it's almost like oops, and then her feet hurt, her wrist hurt.
Yeah.
So
which is
it's like she can tell me, but then
he already said she could barely speak, but yet now he's able to know that she could speak enough to tell him that her feet hurt and that her wrist hurt, and that she was freezing. And so that's definitely a deceptive area. And so whatever he crossed out, it was something that it was too much, and he realized, oh, I shouldn't have said that, and so he crossed it out. What comes up next, I'm sure Peter's going to get to it, is we have more words coming up from probably something that was experienced, something that was going on. And so this is one of those things that's going to come up here with the shaking violently, repeat of shakes, that word's repeated. And so it's something that he pulled out from something that in association with Gabby, but it's a sensitive word. And I think that's one of those words, like we saw before, where he can't make something out without putting in words that he actually perceived or experienced during this event, however long it took. And so that's what he's doing here.
I wonder, Steve, if she was at this point barefoot, and about her wrist, whether that she tried to get away and he grabbed her by the wrist, or pinned her down. That's
what I'm thinking too, is that she tried to get away, and so you hear this. If she was near a creek, then she likely fell in the creek trying to get away. I think he did pull her out of the creek, and that's what he's describing. He's describing some elements of what occurred, but he's just putting a spin on it. But I agree. Otherwise, why would he add those in there? There would be no need to add in that her feet hurt and anything about her wrist. It just, I find it odd. And so things like that are naturally going to stand out. And it goes right along with the shaking violently, and he adds in violently. Where did that come from? The word violently, it would suffice to say that she was freezing, but he says shaking violently. And man, this is now, as we get into the profile, we're starting to, his profile is emerging here in his language. And this is where, for me, and I'm sure, Peter, you felt this as well, that this is where it becomes, we get a sense of who he is, and we're entering into Brian's psyche, his brain, and it's a dark place. It's a dark place. We are sensing, we're feeling what happened here, and it literally is a heavy feeling of what happened to Gabby here, and I think also that with the passing of time, the timing is one thing. To, as Peter mentioned, it slows down the pace of the statement. That's very typical when people are making things up. But if you look at this, the timing, this thing is segmented, and the way that he describes this, all the detail, this is what he's describing her with her, and kind of what the areas that you're highlighting with the begging for an end, and he built the fire, and he's describing things that took a period of time. Time was lengthened, and it tells me that likely her death was not an immediate thing, that it probably took a bit. And
begging,
that is a common thing, that it's, probably a crime of passion. The passion got a hold of him, and he lashed out, and it, intent may not have been in the beginning to take her life, but in the end, that's what he ultimately had to do. The damage was done, and there's a lot of different scenarios there, but definitely there's time passed. I don't think that her death was an immediate thing. I think it was over a period of time.
But she was begging for an end. She could have been saying, stop what you're doing, stop hurting me, and then playing possum. And literally, because he says she would fall asleep. Well, no, she could have been like trying everything, shaking violently, could be trying to get away. That's not, and he could interpret that as shaking, and then, just pretending to pass out or trying to, and then he would shake her. I mean, it seems like a violent encounter. For
Take
certain.
a look at the two areas of red here that are covered.
Which, okay, on yours
page.
here. Got it.
She was so thin, and then we have shaking violently. And I think that supports what Steve just said. And this is very difficult for Gabby's parents, because she didn't die quickly. Time passed here, and she was so thin, shaking violently. So it shows a sense of power and control over her, and she was lean, and he was considerably stronger than she was. And I think that that's what he's trying to tell us is, here's my fake story. Beneath it, here's what really happened, including her wrist, her feet may have been falling, her thinness that he felt when he shook her. It also may speak to his rage, how that adrenaline may have taken over. They're very upsetting words.
They are upsetting. And it's interesting that he blames this whole thing on her freezing. That she was so thin, had already been freezing too long. And that's another indication. It's, I wonder how long this continued on with her frailty. He's describing her frailty with her being thin, her vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is a subtle blaming of the victim.
Yes, he's blaming her. It's her fault. And that's what I said in the beginning, is that that's what we're going to see. And that's why when he's writing to Gabby, he's writing to her, he's thinking, this is your fault. If you hadn't done this, if you hadn't been furious with me, we're going to see the word furious come up here soon. Mm-hmm. But he's blaming Gabby. And I think that is why one of the reasons that you saw that baseline in his writing go from ascending to descending. And he just couldn't keep up that upbeat. And as he's thinking about her, it's a depressive thought for him. Like, if it's your fault, it's your fault, and now look what I have to do. And it's a subtle victim blaming.
Well, backtracking slightly to the point that you mentioned about just after he'd pulled her from the water, you said at that point it was possible that she could have been dead at that point already. If she wasn't dead at that point, then he at least knew that he'd gone too far and his relationship was over, in my opinion, because it's backed up with the fact that this is at this point that our car has now become the car. He knows it's no longer equally theirs. They're not in a relationship anymore, whether it's because she's no longer alive or whether it's because he just realizes that he's gone too far with what he's done. But it's at this point where he turns around and says, we downstream towards the car. So he then goes on to say how his knees buckled, blah, blah, blah. And that line there, she was so thin, that really stood out to me, Peter, because of the fact that surely he would have noticed that his girlfriend was thin before. So it seemed a bit like obscure to be added in there. And it's again a missing pronoun afterwards. There's no she had already been freezing. He just moved on to had already been freezing too long. So that was when he started the fire.
It is sensory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he's involved in some recall here. He's involved in experiential memory mingled into this.
Agreed. And when we're interviewing people, we're investigating a crime and we do an interview, we look for sensory language. Mm-hmm. We know that when we have the sensory descriptions that we're hearing something that is at least partially true because all the senses are involved. And so we want to hear that, to know that it's something they experienced. Well, likewise, even in a deceptive statement, you have sensory language come in, and it came from something that he experienced, even though he's using it in a deceptive way, in a deceptive statement, describing a fraudulent event. So it goes both ways. It can get a little confusing if you don't know what to look for. But the sensory description often sounds, because you have it, it sounds truthful, and so people tend to buy it when they have that. But it's actually one of the ways that he is giving himself away. He doesn't realize it, but he's giving himself away, that he did experience part of this, and it gives us now insight into how Gabby died.
By the way, he switches tense as we go down, I think, to do some distancing. I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries. Everything before, she wouldn't, couldn't, didn't. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I put the document I sent to you. I think I put that in there, didn't I, Eric?
I didn't. I didn't look. At it.
Did you not get it? Fair enough.
No, I have it. I just didn't look at it.
Yeah, it's because he starts with that kind of what I call an unnecessary negative, where he says, "I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries," and these are things to me. When someone says something that they don't know, it makes me question why they would be stating something that they don't know. So it stuck out. But yeah, I did notice that it had gone into present tense more so than past tense with that particular area.
All right, so here we go. The most casual. I ended her life.
Yeah,
I mean that's pretty dark. Just to say it that way, like it's almost like a god. A god ends a life.
Yeah, and God gives mercy.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was merciful.
Well, what I'd like to say here with this bit, if you look at his the description of how she was kind of falling asleep, he kept waking her up, and this painful process going on of waking her up and falling asleep. He didn't want her to sleep, and like what Steve said about the use of the word furious, she was furious that he was waking her up, which indicates that this row that they may have been having was an ongoing row. She's fell asleep. She's drifted off. She's got into a happy state. Then all of a sudden, she's been woken from that happy state, probably violently, probably been shook awake. She's not happy at the fact that she's been shook awake, and is furious, not necessarily just with him, but with the situation in whole. She's no longer wanting to be with him, and he doesn't like that. Because if you look at the kind of personality he is, you look at the narcissistic side of his personality, narcissistic people don't like to be told when the relationship is over by another person. They're the one that wants to make the decision, not have it made for them. Yeah. So in this instance, she's probably said, let me sleep. I don't want to be with you anymore. Leave me alone. And he's like, no, this doesn't work like that. Maybe, even at that point, you say, no, I am keeping you awake for your own good, because you shouldn't let somebody with concussion go to sleep. So there is a possibility that he is actually thinking for her, but, it plays more to me at the fact that, she doesn't want to be with him. He's not happy about it. And the more this happens and the longer this goes on, which collaborates with what Peter said about time, this is the bit where I believe the premeditation has come in. And I think you're smack on the money here, Steve, Peter, with this, where you've said, there's a lot of time passed by and it's premeditated because of the fact that he's had time to think about what's gone on. Every time he's woken her up and she's drifted off, he's sitting there by the fire. He's had a lot of time to reflect, and he's thought, you know what, she might not make it anyway. And even if she does, I'm in a whole lot of trouble with what I've done. The relationship's probably over, and that has probably been the catalyst that has had her, in the end, strangling her. Had him strangling her, not the other way around, sorry. But, I mean, what do you think of that, Peter? Do you think that's probably a close kind of idea of what the chain of events would have probably been?
Yeah, I think we're digging at it. As he gives this long story, if you can picture that, a long story in here that is a fabrication. In all these little points within there, we may be given truth of what actually happened. When Steve was talking about the sensory description as a signal that it's an experiential memory, what we don't always know is, was it an experience at the time of the event or something earlier?
Correct, yeah.
If someone is perseverating upon an event from many years ago, for some people, 20 years can go by and they can still talk about that event as if it just happened. And so it is, and Steve's correct, it's tricky to get to in the interview process, and it's something that we need to be aware of. I think because of a lesser time frame, going down really weeks, that I think that we're probably on the right place in looking at what happened.
But in fairness, because it is what it is, we'll never ask him. We'll never know absolutely for certain. No matter what, we are still speculating to a degree.
Yes, yes. And it's not the same as we're able to say, here is his deception. Definitively, he's deceptive. Then we're looking into a subjective area of where we believe some of the truth may have leaked out. And so I'm qualifying it purposely that way, because I don't know with certainty. I believe it was premeditated, but even that needs an explanation. It doesn't mean that before they went on the trip, he had planned to kill her.
No, I think in the events, I think the premeditation was as it went, and Gavin may be on to something about the vehicle, that might have been the decision point of, I'm going to do this. And I don't think it was instant. I think by all accounts, this is not this is an ongoing process of something that was very horrible, and I feel terrible for her and her family in every way. And I'm not going to go into that. Use your imagination, folks.
What I picture here is, that's it. One more time, and I'm not taking it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One more time.
Which would tie into the fact that the use of the word mistakes that is used is obviously at the time he's thought about it, he's done the deed, and then afterwards thought, that was a mistake. Not because of the fact that he's feeling guilt, it's because of the fact that he's realized that he no longer has her in his life. He's no longer got this person to control, and he's realized he's made a mistake. He never at any point, shows any kind of major elements of remorse that I can see in this. He's saying how he's sorry to the family, but not because he has any guilt, because of the mistake that he made by taking her from him and ending her life and taking her from his life.
I think this is a good point here from Patricia. Devi is a murder in slow motion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly is.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I agree, Gavin, with everything you said about the mistakes. The word mistakes. That is something that that look how closely connected that is with I ended her life.
Yeah.
Now he says, but I see now all the mistakes I made. I agree that he is thinking back. This is something that was building up, and it encompasses that word furious that you used, that he used, and you mentioned that she was furious at some point in time, and I think that's part of what was building. And it was finally, like you said, Peter, one more time. And it was just one more time. She did it one more time. And that was just too much for him. It put him over the edge.
Yeah.
So this is something that was elongated, slow motion.
With the word mistakes as well, well spotted, Steve. It's the word mistakes. It's plural. It's not. I realized I'd made a mistake when he killed her or ended her life or whatever you want to say. It's plural. So again, like you say, very much in congruent with the fact that he's looking back over his life, like you say, and reflecting on the things he'd done.
Exactly.
All right. So to go to, I hate to jump to it, but he went, running home, all that. I definitely want to especially get Steve's input here, because this is interesting change in handwriting, and I can't explain it just from the wetness. That there's something. It's almost like it's a separate pen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is happening here with him stating his final action?
Yeah, it's definitely a separate pen, and it's interesting because it tells us that. It gives us insight that this letter was not all written at the same time. We don't know how much of it was written in one writing and in one sitting, and then when did he pick up? When he added this at the end, please pick up all of my things. How much time had passed? We don't know, and we'll never know. But there's some interesting things here. If you compared this to the handwriting before, what you have here on this last page, his handwriting has changed. It is smaller. It is it doesn't flow as well. It's a little murky. The ovals now have closed in. They're not open like they were before. His T crossings are very low, whereas if you compared it to pages before, his T crossings were actually pretty high. And a T crossing is an indication of, if it's a high T crossing, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. Their self-esteem is pretty good. Right here, the T crossing is low, or they're lower. And so what he's feeling about himself has diminished. And I'm looking at the size of the lettering himself, and this top part. I have killed myself by this creek in the hopes that animals may tear me apart. Look how small the letters are, and they're just this. He has deteriorated now, and I think at this point in time, he's consigned that he is going to take his life. That's a good indication right here. So it's deterioration, and that's, if you were able to look at his handwriting over a period of time, you would see probably this, or if not in him, but if you look at someone that's suicidal, and okay, they committed suicide, and let's look at their handwriting over a period of time, you'll see this progression of suicide. It gets worse and worse and worse. Well, he's progressed here in just this notebook writing to this deterioration right here. And again, he's feeling stress. He's got some, not only the murky writing, but he's got these anger tics. Look, and the anger tics are, if you look at look at the eye, the top of the eye, you have this little tick, the pen bunched up right there. On the next line, if you look at the last word, that, and you can see these little ticks at the top of the T crossing, the top of the T stem, on both T's right there. And you'll see those little ticks throughout that handwriting. Those are anger ticks. Those are irritation. He's irritated. He's irritated that he has to do it, that he's here. I don't know who it is, but he has this irritation inside, and he's deteriorated to the point where he's not in a good place mentally right there.
One thing I noticed here, and I was just looking through while you were talking, and I don't know if it's any relevance at all or something to consider. He only capitalized Gabby one time that I could find, and that was the first reference to her when he spoke directly to her. Yeah. But anytime he referred to her, it was lowercase, almost as if he was minimizing her.
Correct. Yeah. I noticed that as well, and that's exactly what he's doing. Otherwise, he would capitalize her. If he really held her in this esteem, he would capitalize her, but he didn't. He sure put emphasis on himself.
And he capitalized animals.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
So, okay, yeah. So this has been absolutely fascinating. Dark, so dark. I definitely want to get through the super chats. Some people are really kind to donate and help with the show. I've got this here for you, Gavin. YouTube. This is something for you. So I don't know what it's about.
Talks about new.
Oh, kidnapping.
It was from when we were doing, I believe, the Evan Rachel Wood and talking about kind of suicidal tendencies. I believe.
Okay.
Possibly.
Okay.
As a comparison.
Super sticker from E. Miller. Thank you. Sean Brim believes he was talking to the police. Yeah, sure. I think the police are some of the intended audience, along with the world, because the world was very interested in the story. The interest in the story actually was controversial in of itself, because people were saying, why is it they only care about this young, attractive couple who's on social media? And part of the reason is because they are TikTokers. And, well, YouTubers and TikTokers want to talk about YouTubers and TikTokers. So it was part of the reason that it went so wide. And Wild in Wyoming, thank you very much. And these guys are amazing. I'm totally honored to have you all on.
We have a new member, I believe, don't we?
We have a few. There are new members joining. Everything else.
Oh,
this has been fantastic. And honestly, I highly recommend go to Peter Hyatt's channel right now, because he broke this down. So you've got a one pass here with us, and then Peter broke it down so you can watch a second pass at it, because we didn't cover every single detail that he covered. There was people in the chat there. And then Steve also broke it down on his channel, and that's Truth to Lies. And if I don't have them linked in the description, shame on me. I will have them linked in the description for everybody to check them out. But as far as now, everyone, Steve Johnson is on Facebook, I believe. Truth, 2 Lies is your Facebook page, correct?
Right.
So definitely check him out. And this has been amazing. Gavin, as usual, amazing. You know that you're stuck seeing me, and I will see you soon. And I hope to see you guys soon as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been